The U.S. has long had a public health crisis of gun violence. That is nothing new. What we saw is that during the pandemic, it just went into a completely new territory. The pandemic took away a lot of those things that keep people safe within their communities, community centers, people's ability to go to their jobs, and also people's ability to just interact with one another. And in 2020, we did actually witness the single largest increase in homicides that we've seen since the FBI began tracking data in 1960. What we found when we looked at the data, though, is that there was really an increase in gun violence in neighborhoods where gun violence was already bad to begin with, rather than a widespread dispersal of gun violence across cities. So we found that in those neighborhoods that either were historically redlined or had a history of systemic disinvestment, they tended to have high rates of gun violence concentrate both pre and post-pandemic. The reason that gun violence prevention and intervention is included in ARPA often gets missed. The same communities that bore the brunt of the burden of the public health and economic impacts of the pandemic are these exact same communities that saw the rise in gun violence. So we're really seeing a convergence of two crises happening within the same communities at the same time.
It's been 2 years since the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act. ARPA dollars provided a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance sustainable, equitable economic growth. The funds were instrumental in our ongoing fight against violence.
With ARPA funding, the City of Chicago created the Chicago Recovery Plan. The investments were targeted towards neighborhoods most impacted by decades of disinvestment that were both hardest hit in the pandemic and more vulnerable to violence and economic hardship.
An example of a Chicago program that was supported by ARPA funding was the Chicago Resilient Communities Pilot. This was the City of Chicago's Guaranteed Income Pilot program, giving 5,000 eligible low-income Chicagoans and families $500 per month for 12 months with no strings attached.
Our dominant approach to public safety has often been to sort of police the markers and the symptoms of neighborhood disinvestment without really thinking about how to transform the neighborhood conditions that cause people to experience gun violence on a daily basis. The American Rescue Plan really acknowledged that our status quo approaches haven't always been working. It made room for sort of these innovations that evidence really backs that shows that we can reduce gun violence. It explicitly makes those allowable uses and gives local leaders the creativity that maybe they haven't had before.
Baltimore's struggle with a disease known as gun violence is our longest standing public health issue. The president blessed us with $640 million of ARPA funds. We are using that investment by doing, for the first time ever in our city, a comprehensive violence reduction plan that encompasses all things related to reducing violence.
Many of these community safety investments that we're talking about require the participation of people outside of the formal criminal justice field to implement, and they require anyone who views their job as place-based, whether that be economic or community development, to incorporate safety and community safety as part of their job.
We know that every single Baltimorean, police, government, elected officials, the churches, the mosques, synagogues, everybody has a responsibility as businesses to help us reduce violence. But if we're going to do it, it has to be done in partnership with community partners.
We recognize that we cannot police our way out of this problem, and a local government can't do it alone. One of the biggest drivers we've seen related to safety and violent crime has been the lack of real local financial support to address mental health.
So while we're doing things like 911 call diversion, taking folks who are actual mental health people and having them do those responses, allowing our police officers to focus on what they do best, while we also build that community work of how we can deal with each other and better in resolving our conflicts, how we can have people who are credible messengers go out and disrupt those conflicts.
There really is a need to move away from these reactive approaches and towards transformative investments in the community level infrastructure. Things as simple as adding streetlights and painting sidewalks can reduce gun violence.
Destination Crenshaw is 6 pocket parks and the 1.3-mile cultural infrastructure project on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles. We have over 100 public arts commissions from Black local artists. We have 43 Black businesses, the largest Black business corridor on the West Coast. Public safety plays a major role in what we're doing at Destination Crenshaw just by the transition of a disinvested and blighted community to a community that is thriving. All of our programming is based on how we uplift the creative economy through our artists. The culture of Black LA is something that we want people to see and acknowledge, and hopefully utilize our businesses to really drive our economics forward. We tie it to our pride and our hope for our community, and ultimately create a shared way of actually caring for the place that we're at. I talk about it as a cultural infrastructure project because the infrastructure of our community are our vital aspects. They're everything that touch our quality of life. And we sometimes get caught up in concrete and steel when really it's the human element that actually makes the safety things happen.
The investments that we're seeing come out of places like Cleveland and Baltimore, Chicago and LA, they're showing that it's possible to invest in these non-traditional root cause approaches and see results from it.
We started in the Western District, our most historically violent district. In the first year of implementation, they saw a over 30% reduction. And now, with the partnership coming from the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, we're even more excited about how Baltimore and every other city can expand this work with the support of our federal government.
Studies have shown that there have been a major decrease in violence in areas where we've layered federal dollars with our investments from the city and philanthropy. Investing in community violence intervention and prevention is a worthwhile and transformative use of federal dollars that will ultimately lead to safer, equitable, and thriving communities.
We used over $10 million of ARPA funds to create one of the nation's first ever neighborhood safety endowment funds to give our city nearly 2 decades of a permanent source of revenue to invest in the proven interventions that we know that can reduce crime all across our city.
The systemic disinvestment that had happened in our community needed to actually be matched with the opportunity to create an environment that really served a better use of the investment in making sure that it stayed in our local community.
And I think the key lesson here is for the vast majority of cities and counties that did not invest in community violence intervention, to take a look at what's going on in Destination Crenshaw, to see the investments that are happening in the south and west sides of Chicago, and to really look at the fact that it's not only improving safety outcomes, it's improving community well-being and community health at large.